Hey everybody, welcome to Paranormal Zone TV. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you being here on this Sunday afternoon. Now tonight I have a fabulous guest, Keith McCloskey. He's the author, he's a researcher, and there's his website. I'm showing that to you, keithmccloskey.com. He has written some the amazing books, and I aired a show with him many years ago on the Day at Love Pass incident. What a show. He has written a second book now on the Day at Love Pass, an update, and he will be returning to do an update on the Day at Love Pass. But before we start the show, I would ask you if you would please give my show a like. I'd really appreciate it. Please subscribe if you're new to the show. And if you are a frequent viewer, if you would please subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think, or just stop by to say hi. I would love to have your comments under my show. That really helps me with my channel. So tonight, let's welcome Keith McCloskey to the show. Hey Keith, thanks so much for
Uh,
joining us.
yep. Thanks, Norene. You can hear me okay?
Oh yeah, I can hear you. I
Yep, yep, yep,
absolutely,
yep,
yes. Um,
yep, yep.
uh, We just had Keith just doesn't have a video tonight, but the next time we have a show, he told me he will come back with his video. But we have a picture, and that's fine. Keith has a fabulous story to tell us tonight from his book, Unsolved Aviation Mysteries, which the stories are amazing. I bought the book, and I went through all the chapters, and really a great book, and it is on Amazon.com. You can also go to KeithMcCloskey.com and purchase his books. Thank you so much. Keith, tell the viewers about yourself before we start the show.
Yep. Thanks, Noreen. Well, hello, everybody. And as Noreen says, I'm Keith McCloskey. I was born in Ireland many years ago now. I'm almost embarrassed to say how many. I grew up in Africa, in West Africa, because my dad was working out there at the time. And but really, we've lived all over the place since then. Other parts of Africa, the Middle East, even a spell in the Seychelles for a while. And I've lived in Wales, Scotland, and I'm now in England. And I started writing, good, must have been about 15 years ago now. The one area that really grabbed me is mysteries. I've always been a bit of a sucker for a good mystery because I always want to try and get to the bottom of anything and see if I can find an answer. As Noreen says, the Dyatlov mystery was my first sort of foray into mysteries, and for me, it's the granddaddy story of them all. And I've done a couple of other books, and I'm here tonight to talk about my book on unsolved aviation mysteries. So I'll
Was
hand back to you, Noreen.
okay, thanks. All right, so uh, there's 5 chapters in this book. Each one is an amazing story. But I'm gonna just kind of go out of sync, and I want to do the Kennedy curse first. So Keith, would you start that? That's chapter 2.
Yes, I certainly will. Yeah, thanks, Noreen. Well, the Kennedys need no introduction. They're pretty well known family, and a lot of people will also be familiar with what they call the Kennedy curse. You know, JFK and his brother getting shot and all the rest of it. But a slightly lesser known aspect of the Kennedys is the bad luck that they've had with aircraft as well. Just before I go on to the main sort of part of this chapter, um, the father, the patriarch of the Kennedy family, his eldest son was killed in basically what was a flying bomb during the Second World War. They'd taken off to bomb a U-boat pen on the continent. Him and a co-pilot, and basically the aircraft took off. It was loaded with explosives and programmed to fly and land on a U-boat pen across the North Sea. And what happened was the idea was obviously they have to leave the aircraft at some point. But what happened in this particular case was they armed the explosives and they were getting ready to bail out while they were still over England. They were over Suffolk. The plane was going to fly on, a Liberator B-24. It was going to fly on to its target. And just after they armed the explosives, they radioed a message to say, to give a code word that everything was set and they were going to bail out of the aircraft. And the aircraft exploded. It was a massive, obviously being fully loaded with explosives to go through a huge concrete U-boat pen, submarine pen. There was nothing left of it, and the explosion was so severe it destroyed buildings on the ground, damaged buildings on the ground, and a couple of aircraft that had been following it about 1,000 feet behind were also damaged by the blast, and there was nothing left of them, nothing left to bury. It was such a huge blast. And then Kennedy, the patriarch Kennedy, his daughter, she too died in an aviation accident. In the early 1950s, she had remarried, and she and her husband were flying to the south of France on a twin-engine commercial airliner, which had left London and then landed in Paris to drop a couple of passengers off, and it hit severe weather on its way to the south of France, and the plane came down with everybody killed on board that. And uh, Teddy Kennedy, I think it was in a plane crash which nearly cost him his life as well. So they're an unlucky family, quite apart from the assassination of JFK, the murder of Robert Kennedy. But the story I've written about it is about JFK's son, the junior. He was quite a celebrity in his own right, obviously being the son of Jackie. There were, like I say, they need no introduction, but he became very well known as a playboy, and he became a character in his own right. And he had married uh, sort of another society beauty, Caroline Bessette, and the two of them were having problems. The marriage was a bit rocky, to put it mildly. I think he was used to fame and photographers and being hounded by the press all the time, but she wasn't. And she didn't really take to it too well. And another source of problems between the two of them was he never introduced her to Jackie, his mother, and that was a sort of bone of contention between them. But the marriage was heading for a breakup, and they decided to more or less try and give it another one last go. And they were flying to Hyannis Port from Essex County Airport for a wedding, and they were joined by Carolyn's sister, Lauren Bassett, who was fairly well known as a society beauty as well. And the three of them took off on what was quite a sunny, clear day, but with a lot of haze. Um, and everything seemed to be progressing fairly well, but he wasn't that well qualified to fly the aircraft he was flying. I think he was only qualified to fly during daylight. During daylight, he didn't have a night rating, but and he was still a bit rusty is not the word, but he was still getting used to the aircraft. So there is that element of it, with what was to happen. But they passed out over the sea from land, and the radar showed that the aircraft started behaving erratically, and eventually it started dropping at a very fast rate. And eventually it started dropping at 900 feet a minute, and kept going in circles. He managed to right it at one point, and then it went into another kind of death spiral. And at the end, when it hit the sea, it was going down at the rate of 4,700 feet a minute, which is getting on for a mile a minute that it was falling out of the sky. All three of them were killed instantly, and the, uh, there was a massive search. There was wreckage um, of the aircraft on the cover of the sea and they raised parts of the aircraft off the seabed. Um, and it was difficult to explain what had happened because there was nothing wrong with the aircraft. And although he, as a pilot, was still getting, building up his experience, what happened shouldn't have happened. And there are a number of theories about it as to what happened. And none of them really can be answered properly because it just seemed inexplicable that the plane would suddenly start going into circles and descent, dropping so rapidly, and then he manages to recover, and then it starts going into another death spiral before they all get killed. There's sort of stories that the plane had been sabotaged, and possibly one story. It was just the one theory that I quite liked was it's just plain bad luck what happened to them. That maybe he lost control, maybe and possibly there may have been some element of sabotage. But why anybody would want to kill them all, it's a bit of a it's anyone's guess really. But it's an odd one. People say, oh well, yes, it's obvious what happened, that there was a lot of haze. It was turning to night. He couldn't see the horizon, but it was a fairly new aircraft. It shouldn't really have happened. Um, they were 34 miles off the away from Martha's Vineyard, where where they were flying to first before heading on to Hyannis Port. So you can read into it really what you like. But it's just a strange one. Yet another Kennedy death involving an aircraft, or a Kennedy death just, to add to the curse that seems to hang over them all. When you think what happened to his father, his brother, or his brothers, including the one that was killed in the flying bomb, and the father's sister, his auntie, dying. It just seems one family has been struck by so much tragedy and bad luck that it's a strange one. I mean, what you can say about the son, JFK Jr. was, he was a risk taker. He would he went on a holiday to the Baltic once, and went out on a kayak with some friends, and the weather was quite bad, and a lot of people thought that was pretty stupid because he stood a good chance of getting drowned. But that doesn't really apply in the case of what he was doing here. He was flying the aircraft in a fairly straight line from the he'd left the coast, the northeastern coast of the USA, and it was just a short hop over water to get to Martha's Vineyard. It's not like he was doing any aerobatics or trying anything fancy. It was just a straightforward flight, and it's pretty inexplicable what happened to them. And of course, the Carolyn, his wife, and her sister were both killed. From and the family, needless to say, were very upset over it, and so I believe that there was a settlement from the Kennedys to the Bessette family over the loss of the girls. So
Never heard that.
uh, yeah, apparently they did settle out of court. I'm not sure if there was a court case, but there was a settlement was made to the family over the death of the. Well, they lost two daughters. So, So
That is suspicious, Keith. Um,
yeah,
a lot of the stuff wasn't in the news, and I saw the wreckage they had pulled out of the bottom of the ocean, whatever, and
yeah.
it was a ramble, really crumbled up. I wonder if from the destruction of the airplane, is there any way they could have found any evidence of tampering?
Well, from what they saw, they didn't say nothing was found, but it was just excuse me. They didn't find any necessarily any evidence of cables being cut or anything interfered with, but it's the strangeness of an aircraft flying in a straight line. You know, he didn't have it. He turned away from the coast, and it was literally you stay on a straight line till you get to your destination. It just seems so weird that he should what should befall the aircraft happened. Yeah, all he had to do was literally just fly it and land it at Martha's Vineyard. So a lot of people think it's very strange what happened there. You know, there's no real answer for it. I mean, there's talk of secret service of foreign countries being involved, and um, you know that people were gunning. Well, or why they should be gunning for him because he was just he wasn't in the government. You know, he was just the son of a very obviously probably the most well-known president anywhere in the world. You know, everybody's heard of JFK if you
Yeah.
haven't heard of the other ones. So there was no real reason to attempt to kill him. But it is one of the theories that um, that a foreign intelligence agency might have been responsible for it.
I think so because he was young. He could have gone into
He,
politics and
he
run for
probably would have
president.
done. He probably would have done. Yeah, that's very true. He probably would have done. I mean, there's also talk that he had faked his own death in
Oh,
order to,
yeah.
that he was going to fight the deep state who'd organised the killing of his father. So there is that element of it as well. I mean, quite how he would have fought back against the deep state. But had he gone for president, there's a good chance maybe he would have done. You're getting into Kennedy number two there, though, aren't
Right.
you? Because
Yes.
they reckon the deep state was behind, or some people say the deep state was behind the murder of his father. The assassination of his father, and but it's difficult to fake your own death when you're dropping a mile a minute and hitting the ocean floor.
Oh, absolutely. The thing is, too, I
Yeah,
don't think his mother, Jackie, wanted him to fly. She was she
she
was
she
not
didn't
happy about that. I'm wondering
she
if she
wasn't.
had a premonition and she didn't want to come out
Uh,
and say it.
yeah, yep. It could well have been because she didn't like him flying. She didn't like him taking risks either, which he was always doing. But yeah, that's a good point. And they always say a mother's instinct. It's quite possible.
Yeah, maybe she
But
didn't want to come out and say it. No.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But the foreign intelligence thing, they reckon one writer put forward the idea that he was murdered by the Israeli operatives because he had a magazine
Yeah.
called George. And which I think folded up eventually, but he was going to do an expose in that about who had killed the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. And they'd already run a short story on it, but they were going to do a more revealing expose. And there's talk that the Israelis had murdered him to stop the expose. But yeah, it's anybody's guess. To be, it's a strange one. An aircraft flying in a straight line shouldn't go down like that.
No, no, that's really sad. I loved that
Yeah,
kid.
yeah, he
Uh,
was a good-looking lad.
oh
Yeah,
yeah, he was a sweetheart too. He really
yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, you want to go
Yeah.
to, okay, so now we'll go back to chapter one. Okay,
Okay.
this is the Isle of Mull. A Cessna
Yes.
missing, flown by Peter Gibbs on Christmas Eve 1975.
Yep. Yep. Well, this story has. I have an affinity to this story because the plane he disappeared in, which was a Cessna 150. I used to see that regularly as a young. I was a young boy then, because it used to be based at Edinburgh Airport, and I used to go out there plane spotting in my wild youth, and I used to see it virtually every time I was out there. Um, but to go to the story, Peter Gibb had been a Spitfire pilot during the Second World War, and Spitfire pilots, for American audiences, the Spitfire is the glamour fighter of the Second World War. To the UK, a UK audience, if you like. It was, although there were other aircraft that did all the heavy lifting as well, but the Spitfire has a kind of mystique to it, and he flew Spitfires during the war, although he was nearer the end of the war by the time he joined his squadron. Um, but so that was his background, and he was a strange man, Peter Gibbs. He he was an accomplished musician. He was a kind of a, what do you call it, an all-rounder in a lot of areas. He'd been this glamorous fighter pilot during the war, and after the war he set up his own company as a building contractor. But on top of that, he was an accomplished violinist, and he was good enough to play in major orchestras. He was in, he used to play. I don't know how well people up are up. I'm not that much into classical music, but he'd had a big row in Boston, I think it was. He was playing in Boston, in an orchestra there with a renowned conductor, Herbert von Karajan, and he uh, he stood up at one point while they were playing in. I'm sure it was Boston. I need to check that, but he had a row with this von Karajan, and he didn't like the way he was behaving. So von Karajan stormed off and demanded an apology, written apology, which he never sent. But he was good enough, as I say, in playing the violin to be included in orchestras. He played in the Scottish National Orchestra as well, and played in orchestras down south as well in London. So a very accomplished man in a lot of ways, and a strange character, because I've actually spoken to, while I was researching for this book, I've spoken to people who knew him, and some would say that he was a fairly quiet individual, and others have said that he was absolutely full of himself, which I think is probably a bit nearer the truth. And I can give you an example of that. One of my friends, actually, because I'm quite well acquainted with the Scottish aviation community. He's passed away now, but he actually met Peter Gibbs in the late 1960s at Glasgow Airport at the Flying Club there. And Peter Gibbs had, I think he was playing with the orchestra in Edinburgh, and he'd gone over to Glasgow, and he was in the Flying Club for a while. Yeah, I think he was doing some work in Glasgow. And I actually said to this friend of mine, well, what was he like? And I won't use the language he used, but he did say he thought he was God and he could fly without an aeroplane. So that tends to, he was not well liked in the flying club. So anyway, he while he was in Scotland, he used to fly to the Isle of Mull, which is off the west coast, a lovely spot. And he liked the place, and he had this idea that he wanted to maybe buy a hotel there and get into being a hotelier on the island, because it's very busy with tourists in the summer. And he was going out with a lady, Dr. Felicity Granger, who they were romantically involved, and the two of them had had they traveled there by car, and the hotel they were staying at, which is actually right next to the Sound of Mull, which is the water that run the what would you like? And it's not an inlet; it separates the two islands. And he decided that it had an airstrip attached to it, and he decided that it'd be handy to do a little bit of flying around. So the aircraft that he hired, he had to travel back to the mainland by ferry, and he went over with his. I think she was his fiancee actually. Went over with his fiancee, and he hired this Cessna 150, which had by this time had left Edinburgh and had been bought by somebody based over on the west coast of Scotland. And his fiancee drove the car back to the Isle of Mull, and he flew back. So he landed at the airstrip and went into the hotel. And that evening, it was Christmas Eve, and they decided to have a meal late in the late evening, as it was his birthday the following day, which was Christmas Day. He'd had a few drinks, and at 9 o'clock in the evening, he said to his fiancee, "I'm going to take the Cessna up to do a circuit," which seems very strange, almost lunacy, because there was no lights. Um, it was just a basic grass airstrip, pitch black with mountains all around. And it's worth saying at this point that after what happened, there was a civil aviation inspector at the inquest into what had happened. He was asked by I can't remember. I think it's a sheriff up here. It's different up in Scotland the way they conduct these things. But he was asked, would he fly late at night without any aids or lights? And he said, with my experience, I most certainly would not. And it's inexplicable what he did. And the other thing about him was he didn't have a valid pilot's license. Despite the fact of being a fighter pilot, but his eyesight wasn't good, and he had failed his medical. It said that he could only fly with corrected vision, in other words, wearing glasses. So he was going to fly at night with bad eyesight, um, without any aids at all. So he got his fiancee to put two torches on the grass strip, with everything being pitch black, and he took off basically. And the idea was that he would take off, turn around, do one circuit, and then come in and land again. And she watched him take off. The aircraft turned right, then turned right again, and came down alongside the strip. And then he turned again to come in and land. And the plane disappeared from view behind some trees, and that was the last they saw of him and the aircraft alive. The last they saw him alive, and the last that, to the time now, from 1975, that anybody ever saw that aircraft, barely a couple of hundred yards away from landing. Um, anyway, his fiance waited there to see if he'd turned around and gone somewhere else and he was coming back. And eventually, there was no sign of him. And the searches started the following day. The area where he was over the water, so the whole area was searched. They dragged the bottom, no sign of the aircraft or him at all. This was for the 10 days after the after he took off. Also, the island itself was searched. They brought in the extra police. There was mountain rescue teams. The whole island was scoured looking for him, and no sign of him. So eventually, the searches were tailed off, and to all intents and purposes, he just disappeared.
Mm.
And then in April, 4 months later, a shepherd was walking up the hill, tending to the sheep there with his dog, and he saw a body lying on some trees, some branches, not up in the sky, on the ground, and it turned out to be the body of Peter Gibbs. 4 months later. Um, and that's where the mystery deepens, because his body um, contained no traces of seawater, which would have, his clothes that he was wearing, there was no traces of seawater, and they don't know how he had got up a mile up the hill from where the hotel was, how he'd even got there. So again, there's all sorts of theories about it. There's somebody, one of the theories is he was killed by dissident paramilitaries. He'd been he flew to Northern Ireland, and he was killed there by dissident paramilitaries. He was supposedly doing a mission for MI5, because the troubles in Northern Ireland were going on at the time, and the idea that MI5 would want him to take off at night and fly to Northern Ireland for some secret mission. It just seems a bit strange. And the other thing about the night he took off, by the way, was really bad weather was approaching very fast. And he turned, there was sleet and snow and wind. Um, and as a good pilot, which he reckoned he was, he would have phoned for a weather forecast, and he didn't do that either. So a lot of strange things about it. Another theory is that he was involved in a jewel robbery. There'd been a jewel robbery that night on the mainland, and so one theory put forward is he was involved in it, and he'd flown to the mainland to pick up the jewels and fly back with them, and had crashed on the way. Um, it's but nobody could explain how and why he had got on top of the hill where he was found. And again, it's a mystery to this day. Um, I think a wheel was found from the aircraft in that washed up about a year later. I think it was just further up the coast. So, which would imply that the aircraft had gone down in the sea, but the area where it would have gone down had been thoroughly searched. There is a kind of a postscript to this, because when I wrote this particular chapter, I contacted some. I read that a couple of divers had taken photos or they had found the aircraft. They'd been looking on the seabed. They weren't looking for the aircraft. They were doing other things. They were clam fishing, and they came across the wreckage of the aircraft in the area where it went down. But and he sent me several slides that he took of it, but a lot of people have said that they're not definitive enough. There's three of the slides are in the book, so if anybody wants to have a look, they can make their own minds up as to whether that's the plane or not. But again, it still doesn't answer why he did what he did. Why would he put himself at risk like that, knowing that he needed to wear glasses, he didn't have a valid license, the bad weather had arrived by the time he was already up, um, and he had said to his fiancée that if he got into trouble, he would come down in the water and swim ashore. But why would anybody say that in the middle of December? When it's really freezing cold. Just inexplicable, strange behaviour. Could he have committed suicide? But he would have stayed in his plane and sunk with it. But instead, it looks like he made his way ashore and walked up a hill and died of exposure.
Hey, Keith, I read that 10 years later, after they found him, they found the plane 100 feet
Yeah,
underwater, and the doors were
well,
locked. The doors were locked.
yeah, I mean, that's been put out there, but if you look at the pictures that were taken, um, it looks like one of the doors is open. It's not
Oh.
clear, but that's the trouble. They did the aircraft has definitely not been found, so that's not right. The Nobody's brought it up. This diver I spoke to, who was quite straight and honest with me. He said, "You make your mind up. These are the pictures I took." But people have seen the pictures and said, "Well, until we bring it up, we don't know." But you'll never find it now because what the diver was saying to me is that the the tides there, the currents. It'll be covered now in debris and seaweed and rocks, and the original wreckage will have moved. And it was about 100 odd feet off from the shore where he took the photos. But until you bring it up, it might as well be on Mars or the moon.
Yeah.
Until you can bring it up and see it for sure and see what happened, nobody. But it definitely hasn't been properly found at all. That's not right. Anybody saying that?
Well, you know the way. All right, so
Yeah,
let's go on to um, the Kinross incident, which has attracted
Kinross.
the
Yeah,
yeah, that's attracted the attention of UFO enthusiasts.
yeah. It's a big UFO one. This one. It happened in November 1953. Um, it was over Lake Superior, and again, it's a strange one because Kinross Air Force Base was being there was a squadron of F-89 Scorpions which were interceptors. I mean, this is the days of the Cold War when it was getting pretty pretty hot with the Soviets, because the whole idea of the radar stations and the aircraft based up there was to intercept Soviet bombers coming over the North Pole to attack the USA. And Kinross Air Force Base was there was a squadron of F-89s, Scorpions there, and they were alerted by a radar station uh, not far away that was close to. Now I don't never know how to say this. A Canadian gentleman told me it's Sault Ste. Marie or other, but it seems to be spelled Sault Ste. Marie. So apologies to anybody out there who says no, you're saying it wrong. But here, a Canadian guy told me it's Sault Ste. Marie, the locks from Lake Superior that go into Lake Superior. But all the airspace above it is restricted, and it was restricted then. And this particular night, the radar station picked up an unidentified object coming in over Lake Superior, that they couldn't identify it, and they sent up an F-89 with two crew members to intercept it. And the way the interceptions are done, it's done by the radar station. The radar station that identified this flying object handed it over to another station for them to vector the Scorpion. It was F-89 Scorpion, to vector it on to intercept it, and that's exactly what happened. So they were watching it on the radar screen. The F-89, they're exchanging messages with it, saying, you're X thousand yards away from it now, closing in. And as the radar operator watched it on his screen, the two blips merged, and instead of one the Scorpion coming out the other side and the unidentified flying object carrying on, towards the locks. Only the UFO, I'll call it a UFO for now, uh, carried on. The Scorpion disappeared completely, the radar contact for it. And not only did the radar contact disappear, but the whole aircraft disappeared. And this was right over Lake Superior. And they tried getting the aircraft on sending up a radio message, and there was no answer. So eventually, the unidentified flying object carried on and then disappeared. So um, they set up search patterns over the lake, and the really strange thing about it, other than the disappearance, because when the two merged, it looked as if they collided with each other, but they hadn't. It must have passed over it or under it, but it just wasn't there. The Scorpion, almost literally disappeared into thin air. So they sent out search parties. The whole place was scoured, the lake, and no sign of it. And the odd thing is that if the Scorpion had gone into a dive and hit the lake, there would have been debris, but they couldn't find anything at all. The aircraft had literally just disappeared, and all the searches they did turned up nothing. Um, and it later transpired that the unidentified flying object was supposedly a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47, which is the old DC-3, the military version of it. Well, it started off as the C-47, I think, and then became the DC-3. But um, the the uh, the pilot, the commander of that, was flying from Winnipeg to Sudbury in Canada, and when he was questioned about it, that he was the person who was flying, and had he seen the Scorpion, he replied that he was nowhere near. Like, he said he was 30 miles north of where the contact was made. He said it wasn't him that was flying that route. So the mystery deepens, because that C-47 landed at Sudbury. There was no marks or anything on it. He hadn't seen anything untoward, and he kept to his story that he was flying way north of it, nowhere near it. Um, this has become a a big one amongst UFO enthusiasts, because it's reckoned that that the unidentified flying object was well, as the saying goes, UFO, that probably some kind of extraterrestrial ship, if you like, and it swallowed up the Scorpion, because it's never been found to this day, despite searches of the seabed and all the searches they carried out. And they carried out searches over the land as well, to the north of Lake Superior, in case the Scorpion had come down there. There was talk that it had, but even if that had happened, there still would have been the radar contact of the Scorpion coming down. They would have seen something on the radar screens, but there was nothing. It literally just disappeared.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's how it remains. You know, what, 70 odd years later.
Um, Keith, we have a question in the chat. Chris Christopher
Yep.
wants to know. Well, he's asking me, and I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the Antarctic and hollow Earth theory?
No, I don't know. No,
Okay.
that's a new one on me.
Okay, I'll ask around. I'll ask around, Chris.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, so let's
No.
go on to the next story. Are you finished
Yep.
with him? With this
Yeah. Yeah.
fella?
So if anybody has any ideas, I'd be interested you know, to hear them, as to what might happen to that, because like I say, it's again, there's no explanation for just the disappearance.
Keith, there is a Frank Fascino, um, who is the expert on the Flatwood Monster. And
Mm.
included in that Flatwood Monster that we aired a show on, he is. I mean, he knows everything. He was the expert on all the UFOs, things that were happening. We were going to do a show on that, but he included it on that particular show. And this fella
Yeah.
here was included in his uh, 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 talk about the Flatwood Monster and what was happening at that time. And there was
Yeah.
a time of the 1956, I believe, when there was this UFO influx of sightings, and it was a big hush hush. They were
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
keep it quiet, but he was included in this, and his airplane and his disappearance. Okay,
Right.
so let's go on to
The
the
se-
what?
I'll just say very quickly there seems to be a lot of UFO sightings in the 50s. You know, it seemed to be a very prolific period for them. Yeah, I mean, this was in the early 50s when this took place,
Yes,
and it
yeah.
makes you wonder. It makes you wonder if there was some kind of influx of UFOs. I mean, I know it's getting a bit more popular now, but I would say the 50s seems to be the time when there was a lot of them.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
disappearances as well.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
All
Yep.
right, let's go on to the let's see the next one. This is the Sri Lankan mystery of missing
Yeah.
Learjet.
Yep. Yep. This was a very wealthy Sri Lankan businessman. He had a lot of business interests both within Sri Lanka and outside. He had a lot of enemies. It has to be said, as I suppose some rich people do. There's a lot of politics involved and what have you. But he was a pretty decent guy. He was good to his employees and quite highly thought of. But not everybody thought that well of him, unfortunately. So that may have been an element in it. But he used a Learjet to travel around quite regularly, and he had business interests in Malaysia, and he had just been there when he decided that he needed to get back to Colombo in Sri Lanka quite urgently. So it's a fairly short one. This one, the the Learjet, and it was a fairly new one as well. Took off from Kuala Lumpur Airport, and it was he had there was three crew members on board: the captain, the co-pilot, and a steward. Served drinks and what have and food and what have you, and that took off from Kuala Lumpur, and it was flying over the Straits of Malacca. It had to pass Indonesia, and then it would fly over the Indian Ocean to Colombo. And it was a trip they'd made many times because they were backwards and forwards quite regularly. Um, the businessman's name, if I can pronounce it right, was Philip Widgey-Wardine. But like I say, a respected guy, but pretty decent sort of individual. At the time after the takeoff, everything was going normally. They went up to 24,500 feet, and the last message received from them as they got near to the coast of Indonesia was that they were climbing to 27,000 feet on its way to 39,000 feet to then fly on to Sri Lanka. And that was the last message that anybody that they got on the ground. They were going to make a report a few minutes after that at a reporting point at Medan, and they never heard from them again. And it literally just disappeared. So you could say, okay, there was it fell out of the sky and crashed and all the rest of it. But again, nothing ever really. There was no concrete evidence of that other than somebody thought he saw a flash in the sky, and again a wheel turned up, which was believed to have been in the water, believed to be from the aircraft, but nothing else. Um, but there's many theories about that because uh, what he had uh, what he had done was all his business interests outside Sri Lanka, he had cut them off from Sri Lanka so that there was no tax payable there, or people could say, "Well, you own all these companies outside Sri Lanka, and you're not paying." The right amount of money here. But I mean, let's face it, businessmen look for all sorts of dodges and deals to try and avoid paying tax. But there's also talk that he fell on the wrong side of politicians in Sri Lanka. So again, like I say, a fairly quick one, this one, but nobody knows what happened to the aircraft.
Uh,
They were never, basically, after they left Kuala Lumpur, they were never seen again.
uh, wow. And his plane was never found, and neither was his body.
No,
Now,
no,
did he
nothing.
fly? Did he fly kind of the same route where the Malaysia airliner disappeared?
Well, that's actually quite an interesting one. The aircraft wasn't that far from it because the Malaysian airline ones came back over. It took off and it was heading away from Malaysia, but it did come back over, more or less over the same route that his Learjet was on. Probably a different height, but yes, it was very close to it, very
Wow.
close to it.
Oh, that's
So makes you
strange.
wonder, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the last one, Alfred Loewenstein.
Yeah, well, this is one that I mention this to a lot of people because I always try to get people's take on it, um, as to what happened. It's not so much the disappearance of an aircraft; it's what happened to the man himself. He was one of the world's richest men at the time, and a man who was sort of really forward thinking, because he started getting into aircraft because he was a wealthy businessman. He was traveling all over the place, and he could see the benefits of having an aircraft to cut down traveling time. He was traveling backwards and forwards to the continent. He was Belgian, but they had houses in France, Belgium, and the UK, and he spent a lot of time in Britain. Um, and he had he decided to hire the very latest aircraft, which by our standards now would be an old crock, obviously, but it was a state of the art, a Fokker 7 Dutch aircraft, but it was state of the art for the time, and he converted it basically into his own private aircraft, which was very forward thinking for the time. He used it for all his business travel, and instead of having to take a train down to the coast to get onto a ferry to arrive on a Belgian port and then take another train to Brussels, the aircraft could do it in probably an eighth of the time it would take all that. And this particular day in 1924, it was a brand new aircraft. He'd not long taken delivery of it, and at that time, the main airport for London was Croydon Airport, which was the Heathrow of its time, which is London's main airport now. But it was a busy airport, and he had gone down with his staff. There was he had his butler or his valet with him. He had a mechanic with him if there was any problems with the aircraft. Two stenographers and a male secretary, and as well as the pilot. They boarded the aircraft and took off to head to Brussels. Anyway, at one point, he got up during the flight to go to the toilet. Now, the toilet was not that large an aircraft. If you look in the book, I've got a layout, the seat layout, but there was room enough for everybody in it. He got up to go to the toilet, So to get into the toilet, there was a kind of a little vestibule where you came when you came on the aircraft. You came through the aircraft door into this little vestibule. The toilet was another door in front of that, and to the left was a door which led into the main cabin. So he went through the door into this vestibule, closed the door behind him to go to the toilet, and after a while he hadn't come back. So somebody decided to go and see if he was okay. And he was in his early 50s, but a very fit man. Went through to check, and he wasn't there. And it was not that it wasn't like a Boeing 747 where you could probably hide somewhere if you wanted to. There was literally nowhere to hide. So he had literally disappeared. So they didn't, the aircraft, they were all in a panic about it as to what had happened to him. So the aircraft landed on the beach when it got to Belgium, and they searched. They actually landed in a military area, and some troops came down to see what the hell was going on. Plane just landing on the beach out of the blue, and they explained that what had happened. This man, who was one of the richest men in the world, had just disappeared. So they all searched the aircraft, and literally no sign of him anywhere. Looked in the luggage compartment, not in there. Um, Again, inexplicable. So the aircraft took off and landed at Brussels airport, and a search was started in the channel, because that's the only thing that they could think, was that he had somehow got out of the aircraft and fallen to his death. Anyway, they found his body was found by fishermen about 10 miles offshore. So he had obviously fallen 4,000 feet from the aircraft to his death. But how that could happen
Absolutely.
is is the big question. The suicide, the people say he committed suicide, but he was a strong Roman Catholic. So, and there's a lot of strictures in the Catholic. I'm a Catholic myself. Suicide's forbidden, especially for somebody who follows it as fervently as he did. So, suicide you could rule out. But then you think, well, but still, how did it happen? And when the plane was flown back to Croydon, a team of inspectors got on board, and they took off to the height that the aircraft would have been at when he disappeared. And a rope was tied around one of the inspectors, and he threw himself at the door to try and open it, because he couldn't, and he couldn't because of the slipstream of the aircraft. It was a quite a large door. It was pushing the door shut, and he wasn't a particularly strong or big man, Loewenstein. So how could a man of his weight and size have pushed the door open against such a strong force? Because you had the prop wash as well from the propellers, which as well as the forward speed of 130 miles an hour pushing against the door. It's almost impossible. So then you're left with, was he murdered and thrown to his death by but then you would have to say that everybody on that aircraft, 6 people, was in on it, and not one of them said anything, including the two stenographers. To have overpowered him and watched as he was thrown out the door. Again, it seems unlikely. Would every one of those people have seen that man murdered and not done anything or said anything for the rest of their lives about it? You'd think of near enough half a dozen people, somebody would get a guilty conscience and say, well, I've got something to say, and get it off their chest. But then I suppose you could say, well, they would have been a witness to a murder. But especially to the two stenographers, would you'd think one of them would have said something. But equally, but how can you explain what happened to him? You know, okay, if he wasn't murdered by everybody and they threw him out, and he he didn't commit suicide because he was a very strong Catholic, and he couldn't open the door and fall out even by accident. How can you explain it?
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Oh my
Well,
God.
it's I often say to people, "What do you think happened?" Because I can't think of a reason for it. Now, the one thing I'll go on to say about this particular story is he married somebody, as they did then. Well, it still happens now. A very rich man marries a younger woman. They had a son who also died in a plane crash later, during the war. But his wife was quite cold. People remarked on her being quite cold, and she was keen to get the death certificate sorted out, and she didn't attend his funeral in Brussels. So you could read something into that, and there is a theory that she was having an affair with a pilot who was a chap called Donald Drew. But if that's the case, they could say, oh well, she was trying to get his death certificate very quickly to get her hands on the money, but she was his wife, so she would have got the money anyway. Irrespective of whether the death certificate came, tomorrow or in 2 months' time. It seems a bit of a strange one, but there's a theory that she was having it because he was a bit of a ladies' man, seemingly, this Donald Drew. But you still come back to it wasn't just him. He was flying the plane, so how would the plane have flown? There wasn't autopilot in those days, so how would the plane have flown himself for Donald Drew to kill him and throw him out of the door? And not only that, Donald Drew would have had to have everybody else, including his personal secretary, his valet, and the two stenographers, the male secretary, all helping him to do it. And would they all say, "Yes, we know you're having an affair with his wife. We'll help you throw him out the door." It just doesn't seem plausible, does it?
Oh, no.
Mm.
Well, of course, you don't know the story behind this man. I mean, his personality. Was he rotten? Was he mean? Maybe the people around him
Yeah,
didn't
well,
like him.
well, yeah, he did have enemies. There's no doubt about it. He was good to his staff. He was very particular, very aloof, but he treated his staff well. But he did have enemies. He had a lot of enemies. I suppose in that line of business, there was a lot of cut and thrust, and he offered the Belgian government. He offered the Belgian government £10 million, interest free for a year to help them out, and they turned it down because he was disliked intensely.
Mm.
And £10 million in those days was a hell of a lot of money.
Oh,
Um, so he had enemies, but again, you've got to look at it and say, well, these enemies may have said to all the staff on the plane, "We'll look after you. We'll give you enough money to see you through for the rest of your life." To
right.
six people, and they've all got to be in on it again.
Yeah.
It's and it's let's face it, they weren't the people who were there had probably never been involved in a murder. It's one thing to say I'll offer you a lot of money to one person, but to get half a dozen people to do it and murder somebody if you've never done that in your life before, again it seems implausible because he would have fought for his life, and you'd have been overpowering a man who was going to be thrown out 4,000 feet to his death. Could they have done it? I suppose it's possible, but
Maybe the
it's
key. There's no other explanation. They had to have been
well,
in
there
on
isn't.
it.
There must have been. It's the only explanation I can think of. There is one other theory that there was a guy who wrote a book on this particular story, and he thinks that somehow or other that Lowenstein had gone into um, the luggage, got an entry into the luggage compartment um, from the toilet, removed a couple of panels and hid in there, and then basically disappeared after they landed. But the plane was searched when it landed at when it got to Brussels, when it doesn't explain how he. Yeah, the theory behind that is that the body in the channel wasn't him, but you still had to have had a dead body somewhere to throw into the channel for him to disappear. It's the whole thing. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But I have to say, when you look at them all, the murder one is the most plausible,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it would have needed every one of them to be in on it and to say nothing for the rest of their lives.
Oh, hey, well, in those days, I don't know how wealthy those people were that were working for him, but I'm sure they didn't have that kind of money. And
No, 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 they,
maybe the wife conjured this all up, got a hold of him, and said, "This is the plan," and she's going to pay him all off. And if they're going to get a ton of money, who knows? Maybe they really needed the
yeah.
money.
Yeah, well, they wouldn't have been well paid. I mean, a mechanic and a valet, a butler, they wouldn't have been paid much at all in those days. The salaries then were peanuts. I mean, you could say they're peanuts today, but unless you were a businessman or whatever, you weren't wealthy in any sense of the word or rich. You were at the nearly at the bottom of the pile, sort of thing. So yeah, again, comes back to the wife, but it's a strange one because it's something for six people who've never killed anybody to gang up on
Right.
somebody and throw. There's murder and there's murder. If they said, well, we'll give him a drink with poison in it, okay, that's one thing, and possibly one person could do that and get away with it. But for six people to jump on somebody and who's fighting for his life when it became obvious as they moved him to the back what was going to happen to him, it takes a lot of nerve to be able to do something like that, to throw somebody out of a door at 4,000 feet.
Well, in those days, I don't know how good their investigations were. If they had searched the plane to see if there was any kind of scratches or signs
Yeah,
of,
well,
you know,
the whole investigation was very poorly done, which doesn't help because the Belgians reckon it was nothing to do with them because it was a British registered aircraft. They said it should be investigated in Britain. The British police weren't over keen because they said it happened in international airspace near Belgium, so it should be a Belgian thing. So it was very poorly done. And really, all the people involved should have been. They were. They gave an interview, but they weren't kept for any length of time and rigorously interviewed afterwards. It's like just a tragic accident, and they were virtually let go straight away. So it was badly handled as well.
um, just a second, I lost my, oh my, hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, here we lost it. Oh, God. Oh, here we go. What's going on here? Hold on, I'm losing this.
Okay.
And, oh, God. Okay. There's something wrong here. Okay, I don't want to touch anything. Um, Oh God. Something
Oh
happened. It
dear.
like disappeared off my screen.
Oh
Keith,
dear.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. Now, Keith,
Not at all.
we had talked about I want you to come back. You have so many fabulous books. And
Yeah.
let me see if I have all the books here. Um I had somewhere where all your books were. Don't remember where I put it. He's
It's
got
okay.
like 9 books, and I mean, absolutely fabulous books. Oh, let's see. Here's 6 of them. Okay, look, The Mountain of the Dead. That's what we did. We did a show on that,
Yeah, that's
and
right. Yeah.
and then The Journey to the Day at Love Pass. That's your new book? on the day at Love Pass.
Yeah, yeah, that's been updated as well. Yeah.
And let's see, the lighthouse. That's the one I want to do with you. We'll do that in October, okay?
Yeah, okay, doke.
And I'll do a Sunday because I know you work. So, and now I know
Yeah,
that there's 9 hours difference between us. So it'll be a 1 o'clock show. Is that okay with you?
that's fine. That's fine. That's
Okay.
fine.
And
Yeah.
so I want to thank you so much, really, for coming on the show. Um,
No, it's
it was
my pleasure,
just
Maureen.
I love having you back. I still think about that show and talk about that show we did a long time ago on Day at Love. It was
Yeah.
so good. So that book that
Yeah.
you now have written, it's an update on that case.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, so oh no, we'll do that another time. So October we're
Okay.
gonna
Yeah.
do the innkeepers,
The
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 disappearance
the
of the
the
innkeepers.
the lighthouse keepers. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, the lighthouse
Yeah.
keepers.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
they did a movie on that, and
There's been a couple. Yeah, there's been a couple now.
oh God, that ought to be good. Okay, so we'll
Yeah.
do that on a Sunday. I'll get back with you for a date and time. Well, I know the time. Thank you so much
Okay,
for
Maureen.
joining us. It was
Not
such a
at all. Yeah.
pleasure. I
Yeah. Thank
love
you,
your
Maureen.
stories. You're a fabulous writer and you're a great storyteller,
Okay.
and I just loved having
Thank
you
you.
on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Noreen. All the
Have,
best. Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Oh God. Um, I wanted to show you something, and I guess I don't. I thought I had saved it for you. Anyway, Halloween season, yay! Let me this. Okay, I want to show you. Um, okay, I want to pull this up and find this for you. I don't know why I wanted to show this. Uh, God, we're gonna do a show on the 10th. That's it. I want to show you I made a thumbnail already for it. Um, let me go and get this for you. Hold on. On the 10th, I have a show and I'm so excited. All right, let me go get it. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you haven't seen, um, if you haven't seen the show with Keith and myself on the Day at Love Pass, it's it's really it was so good. He actually What Keith does is he doesn't just write a book. He um he goes he goes to the cities, the towns, he talks to people who's involved in the case, and he gets all his facts before he writes a book. So everything he writes in his books, it's all fact. And that's what it's so great about what's so great about key books. Okay, hold on, I'm downloading. And so when he went to Russia, he actually went to Russia. Um, oh my goodness, he actually went to Russia to get the information on the day at La Paz, and they let him go in to their documents. And he went through all their documents. He went out to the area where the hikers disappeared. Ah, here it is. Here's what I'm. Yes, this. On October 10th, we are going to do a show with Dave and Jenny, and we're going to his spirit shack, Shantytown Spirit Shack. And there's a picture of the shack back there, and it's going to be a live investigation. And um, Jen is going to do a channeling. I guess Dave is going to do the spirit box and the K2, and they're going to see what they can. The land that this is on it's there was so much going on in that area. Really bad stuff. The land is bad in itself. So I'm hoping that they can conjure up some spirits and what's going on uh, in that location. It's just not the house; it's the land that it's on. So this will be our first uh, event for Halloween month, October. Okay, and then I'm gonna have Keith come back. We're gonna do the disappearance of the light keepers. Um, that'll be good. And then I have another show I had scheduled with Steve Stockton, but um, he wanted to do a show on celebrities. I didn't know any of them. I had no idea who any of those celebrities were. So I'm going to have to change the show. He has so he has so much information that he could share with us and some really scary stuff. So I'm going to get a hold of him and I wanted to know the scariest stories he has. And that's for October 24th. So we will have 3 shows in October. Okay. So I haven't posted. I'll post that up today for the 10th, and I'll post up the light keepers. Talkcross, you know what I'm talking about because you had sent a message about that. You know more about it than I do. So anyway, so guys, thanks so much. Please leave me a comment. I'd really appreciate it. Please give me a like if you like the show, and please subscribe if you haven't done so. I'd really appreciate that as well. Um, I need to get some more activity. And so now, the way that YouTube has everything, the more likes you get, the more comments you get, the more views that you get, your channel will get more noticed. I've noticed that my some of my shows are in on off the side. They do promote them, but it's not enough. I mean, I've been doing this for years, and I would really like to get a little bit more viewership and more noticeable. I'd really appreciate if you would help me out on that. Okay, so guys, have a great rest of your Sunday. Uh, for uh, Keith, it's uh, it's after it's after 10 o'clock, so that's why we had it. I thought it was 9. I thought it was 9 o'clock that we would start the show his time, but it wasn't. It's 10 o'clock. So he's another hour further out than what I thought, and I think he did too. So it'll probably still be a 1 o'clock show for him, and so anyway, that's it. Have a great week coming up, and I'll see you on the 10th. And I'm so excited with this show with Jen and Dave. It's going to be really great, and they're excited as well. It'll be the first time the house will be shown. Their cottage shanty shack will be shown. So everybody have a great week, and I'll see you on the 10th. And I love you guys, and thank you so much for joining me. Um, I really appreciate this, and appreciate all your support. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Hug. Oh gosh, I guess I better do some shout outs. Sometimes I forget and I'm sorry. Thank you to my mods, Renee and Chippetary. I love you two so much. You know that. So shout out to Tallcross, my buddy from Scotland. Uh, Christopher Chris, thank you so much. Let me see. Go back in here. I am Alpha. Thank you for being here. Lori Miller, thank you so much for being here. Um, who else is left in the chat room? Uh, who else is left in the chat room? Go back. Let's see who else is left in the chat room. Oh, Lisa Scarrett had to leave. Thanks, Lisa. You're always here. I think you're from the UK as well. Um, anybody else? Shout out Albert Witch Wiggler. I forgot to tell Keith. I'll send him a message and let him know that he made the correct pronunciation. Deck magnet. You were new last time, so I hope you subscribed and thanks for joining us again. Um, uh, I don't. Anybody else want to shout out before I close down? Oh, Andrew. Oh, Andrew was here. Andrew and the gnome. Thanks, Andrew, for being here. Nice that you guys could come on a Sunday. All right, I'm gonna go now. I love you guys again. Have a great weekend, and thank you so much. I'm gonna go now, and I love you, and um, have a great week. I'll see you on the 10th. Okay, thank you. Love you.